running a few minutes late. We had some technical difficulties and we have solved them, which is usually actually the best way for technical difficulties to end. And we have here today with us, we're very fortunate to have a great guest, Dave Huguenel, who's been on the program before. Welcome, Dave. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. And to be clear, the technical difficulties were 100% my fault, not Kevin's. He was incredibly patient with me as I basically tried to relearn how to use a phone and a computer.
Well, I deal with Oregon Democrats, so I have learned to be incredibly patient. But we are not going to have to be hopefully patient too much longer because I got a feeling we might be heading towards some kind of positive outcomes here in Oregon. And it's been very exciting because, for instance, here's just a sample of the news articles just the other day in the 5th Congressional District. I believe it was... I can't remember the name of the news outlet, but they came out and said that actually it looks like the national folks are kind of pulling back their money from McLeod Skinner, which means, don't rest on your laurels. We have to run through the tape, but they don't feel too strongly about her. I think it was the NRCC said took that. Oh, it was Axios.
Yep. Yeah, so to put that in context, what basically happened was the DCCC, which if your listeners don't know what that is kind of the national funding mechanism for Democrats. That is their caucus. They spend money on TV ads, they recruit candidates, all that sort of stuff. And Republicans have that version of it. We have the NRCC, they have the DCCC, and those organizations spend nationally, right? And they look at all 435 congressional districts and try to figure out where their pickup opportunities are. And what happened was the DCCC and Nancy Pelosi's PAC, the House Majority PAC, I think is what they call hers. Kevin McCarthy has what's called CLF. They pulled out of Oregon 5. They decided that they weren't going to invest any more money there. They put some of that money into Oregon 6 instead. But you're also seeing this happen nationally. And this is what happens when races really come down to the wire, is these organizations really have to figure out, okay, where are our dollars really going to move an election? And basically, to your point, what it looks like was national Democrats said, look, we don't think we can change the outcome of this election with the money we have available. We're going to spend this somewhere else. So that's obviously a very, very good sign for Oregon 5. And it's also, frankly, a good sign for Oregon 6. Oregon 6 is a district that Biden won by, I think, 15 points, 16 points, something like that in 2020. It's obviously a new district, but you look at how that area voted in 2020. This is an area that Oregon 6 is not an area that Republicans should technically be competitive in, let alone Oregon as a state, to be honest. But reality is that the campaign, Mike Erickson's campaigning very aggressively there. They're running a really great campaign. And the result is Democrats are having to spend more money there than they would want to. And you're seeing that all across the country. It's exciting to be in Oregon because Oregon is really a kind of a microcosm of the problems that Democrats are having on a national level.
Oh, we're definitely the poster child for what has come to inspire voters to maybe be heading in the direction of a red wave elsewhere. But I mean, we've also experienced it in such an extreme version, and Democrats are 100% responsible for it because they're in charge of everything and have been for a while. But it's funny you mentioned about Oregon 6. Oregon 5, by the way, last week, several different entities moved Oregon 5 from toss-up to leaning Republican, which I think that literally came out a day after the DCCC did their report, which meant they saw their polling. The public polling came out a little bit after that, and that's why they were pulling out. But then Oregon 6, here's the news headline this morning. Mike Erickson, CD6, ahead by 4%. And they show the analysis by 538, who doesn't exactly lean Republican in their analysis. I think they try to be, straight up the middle. But if you look at what they did in 2020, I'm not sure they were.
Sure.
But it says Oregon 6, not only is Mike Erickson leading by 4%, but he's been leading for months. which has not been a popular narrative with the news media here in Oregon, I can tell you. They've made it sound like he was behind or it was a toss-up. A 4% lead is pretty close to the edge of the margin of error in most polls.
Right. And again, I mean, obviously, one, when you look at polling, you can kind of look at the trend. And the trend shows that, Mike Erickson has either been competitive or ahead. Most polls, I think, have shown him ahead for the duration of this campaign. Right. It's the same thing we've been seeing in Oregon 5 too, where Republicans have just been ahead. And what Democrats have really tried to do, I'd say, really in the months of August and September and early October, was they really spent a lot of money attacking Republicans on the issue of abortion. Using the Dobbs case, things like that. That was their kind of Hail Mary pass, right? Because it's super clear, if you're talking about the economy, Republicans win. If you're talking about crime, Republicans are more popular on that issue. If you're talking about homelessness, these are all issues that voters don't trust Democrats to solve problems on. They trust Republicans. But you look at polling, generally speaking, Democrats, are a little more popular, I guess, on the issue of abortion. So they were like, okay, well, we got to make this election about that. So let's spend gobs and gobs of money talking about abortion. And what happened was they did that. Numbers didn't move. Nothing dramatically changed because there's going to be tons of people like me nasal gazing, trying to figure out why it didn't change. I think the simple matter is that when inflation is at record highs, people can't afford to put gas in their cars, and they're afraid of their cars getting broken into or their homes getting broken into with crime, at record levels as well. Those types of social issues just aren't front of mind as they were in previous elections. I think of like elections like 2010, 2012, even maybe a couple prior to that, where, if everything else is fine, if the economy is great, the economy, crime is low, that's when those issues tend to become more to the forefront. And Democrats weren't able to do that this time.
Yeah, there's a lot of polling that's gone on about issues out here in Oregon, and it really seems like when you look at the top, say, 5 issues, abortion probably, only because of the way it's been driven as a narrative and because of the Supreme Court decision, comes at the bottom of that list. And even issues that Democrats have talked about a lot in Oregon, like climate change and all that, that's even further. That's like 10 or 12. And then you look at the top 3, and they're the top 3 that the Democrats cannot talk about or they lose. So, right. But I know what you mean. It's like, well, if we run a bunch of ads, and there's a lot of news about how much big money is coming into these races. I mean, there's millions of dollars coming in right now that they're trying to pump in here, from a lot of it from outside groups too, and super PACs that are trying to influence the issues that people are focused on. I know that you can't watch a YouTube video here in Oregon and get through even one video without seeing at least 2 political ads, usually one at the beginning, and then one interrupts a longer video right in the middle. And you have to go skip ad. And then it comes back usually at the end. And it's just wall to wall. And it's like, I would say 75% negative ads attacking the Republican, and maybe 25 like a positive ad saying something good or redeeming, I guess you could say, about the Democrat. Is that common to really go that hard on stuff like that?
I mean, certainly at this point, it's certainly common when these races are so close. And like you said earlier, I mean, if Mike Erickson's up 4 points, that's within the margin of error. I assume the margin of error of that poll was 5%. That's typically what it is. Sometimes it's as low as 3. It's still really close, right? You're seeing that all across the country. I live in Georgia. Obviously we have a really competitive U.S. Senate race between Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. It's the same thing. I can't, walk from my living room to my office without, seeing 5 different ads attacking each other on my phone as I make my way through my house. It's just the reality of a close campaign. Those ads are going to be typically what you see a lot of over the next 8 days, or almost 7 now.
Yeah, and I think don't have as many positive things to say. They just talk about its background info. I think the one in the governor's race with Tina Kotek uh, uh, tries to claim that she was the first one that called for a homelessness emergency, and just leaves out the fact that she was Speaker of the House and could have absolutely made it happen if she wanted. And then attacks, get this, not only attacks Christine Drazen, but attacks Kate Brown, the least popular governor in the country, assuming that a bunch of people will forget that they are of the same party, and Tina Kotek was her wingman for half a decade.
Well, and again, I mean, this is why I think Oregon's this perfect example of the struggle the Democrats are having right now, right? Since 2010, right? So from 2010 until 2018, Republicans controlled the House, right? So at a minimum, you could always blame it's those pesky Republicans in the House that aren't letting us get everything done. If we controlled all three branches of government. And in 2016, Donald Trump gets elected. Then they've got their real boogeyman. Then it's it's all Trump's fault, yada, 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 right? Well, now, Democrats control the White House. They control the House. They control the Senate. Granted, Senate's 50-50, but, they got the tie-breaking vote with Vice President Harris. Reality is that, they don't have a boogeyman to blame for any problem that's out there. That it's a problem that they could have solved. They control all the levers of government. And in Oregon, it's even more true than that, right? I mean, not only do they control all three branches of government, they control them with supermajorities, I believe, in the House, maybe not the Senate. I can't quite recall. And they've had the governor's office since I was waddling around in diapers. Like, the reality is, they've controlled Oregon for a long time. So for someone like Tina Kotek, who's been the Speaker of the House for nearly a decade, I think, right? Pretty close to it. I think she was Speaker in 2014. There's just no boogie. Like, she is the boogeyman. Kate, and if she's trying to if she's trying to point to who caused the problem, she has to point to other Democrats, thus Kate Brown. It's one of the reasons that Kate Brown is one of the most unpopular governors in the country.
And yet, I think Tina Kotek made sure that every single thing Kate Brown wanted pretty much got delivered, or she ran interference for her while Kate Brown did it anyway through like executive orders, or during COVID, the lockdowns, and the way they handled that and the way they kept schools closed. There was a very powerful person who could have easily brought something to the floor that would have actually pressured the governor to do something different. And even Kotek now admits that they made a mistake. She didn't say the word mistake. She said, we shouldn't have kept them closed so long, which is the same as saying, well, we did this, but we shouldn't have done that. So I'm going to fix it. She pivots straight into how she's going to fix it. And nobody believes that now.
Right. Well, and there's a little bit of a, boy who cried wolf with the Democrats, right? I think the other thing is Democrats have ran a very similar playbook for a long time, where they, in Oregon specifically, where they accuse their Republican opponents of being extremists.
Obstructionists.
They're obstructionists, or they're extremists. I've seen some of the ads that Tina Kotek's running, are accusing, Christine Drazen of being a MAGA extremist. Christine Drazen is anything but that. I mean, the reality is, she's obviously a conservative. She's obviously a Republican, but she's a very policy oriented person that's very, very grounded in sort of Oregon issues. You haven't seen her stumping nationally like other gubernatorial candidates. Like, there's just, the reality is they've kind of ran this gamut where it just doesn't stick. And frankly, you're seeing the same thing with Lori Chavez-DeRemer in Oregon 5, where they're trying to attack her as being an extremist. Anyone that knows Lori DeRemer knows that, she is, basically a moderate Republican. She's, she's been former mayor of Happy Valley. She's really known for sort of, her lead on local issues. That's the issue that Democrats have, is they're trying to lob these attacks and they're just not sticking. Whereas, if a Republican is being critical of a Democrat, we don't have to use conjecture. We can just use their record. Their reality is, or their words. I mean, the reality is that Tina Kotek supported policies that defunded the police. She supported policies that made the homelessness problem worse. Democrats like McLeod Skinner referred to the riots in Portland and elsewhere as righteous anger. That there are things that they have done and said that make it to where like we're not making anything up. We're literally just saying this is what you said a few months ago or a year ago.
And it's hilarious too, because then they issue these sort of fact checker things, and everything's getting fact checked by the campaigns fact checking their opponents, which is like the silliest thing ever. But they're coming out and claiming, well, she didn't really say that. And some of the friendly media is like, oh yeah, she's right. It's not exactly that, but they're splitting hairs because it's really hard to reverse the impression people got that as they stood by and either encouraged or said nothing as Portland was ablaze, and riots are going on and federal marshals are being attacked and blinded and police are being attacked and demonized, and people said they said nothing, or they said something that actually sounded supportive or sympathetic.
Well, since you brought up the media there too, I mean, one of the things that I thought was a travesty in Oregon is the fact that the Oregonian and the Willamette Week both unanimously, like across the board, endorsed nothing but Democrats for governor and Congress in the Portland metro area. To me, that is an absolute shame. It really is. You're telling me that out of all of those races, it just so happens that coincidentally the Democrat is the best one for every one of those seats, when the reality is Democrats have drove that state into the ground. That to me is absurd, and they're doing their readers an absolute injustice. And reality is they should just admit what they are. Just admit, like, stop pretending to be some sort of fair and balanced media outlet. You are the Pacific Northwest version of whatever left-leaning newspaper rag there is.
Oh, they're just a campaign arm. We saw this last week. We talked to a candidate who is the majority leader in the state Senate out here, Rob Wagner, and he has been in the state Senate for 4 years. He's been for all the stuff. Willamette Week interviewed him and his opponent, and they said they ended up endorsing him, and then said nothing but bad things and how arrogant he was and how he refused to even answer their questions. And then we had this same tepid endorsement of people like Tina Kotek, which, it's funny. They're trying to get out of it in the body of the endorsement by saying, well, but we have concerns about this and we're unhappy with that, but we're endorsing them anyway. And it's like, then endorse nobody if you can't bring yourself to it, but don't endorse somebody who just said was not very good.
Well, and I'll go a step further and say that if they're going to continue endorsing in this way, where they're just going to be blatantly partisan in how they endorse, then they need to start taking ownership for some of the problems in the state too. Because if you're endorsing these folks that don't fix homelessness, that don't fix crime, that can't handle the economy, then you know what? The Oregonian is just as complicit in the homelessness problem as Tina Kotek is. The Oregonian is just as complicit in the rising crime and rising drug use in Portland as Kate Brown is. That is just the reality. They have responsibility when they hand out those endorsements and policies go sideways like they have in Oregon. That is just as much on them as it is on the politicians.
Absolutely.
And they don't start. And it's something that gets me absolutely irate. I am sick and tired of them. Sick and tired of them.
Yeah, they don't deserve the credibility that they get from voters, and maybe people are starting to see through that. Because this is them pulling out all the stops and acting like they're just a campaign arm. We know, for instance, from the Willamette Week, the behind-the-scenes comment from one of the people on the editorial board was, well, we had no choice. We had to endorse them. Well, if you have no choice, you have to endorse them, then you're taking orders. You're not actually making objective decisions. You're not taking to facts and even speaking to what's best for the people of Oregon. You're taking orders from politicians and people who perhaps wield a lot of influence, or maybe they fear the left. And I think that this is something we're seeing now play out in the governor's race, but really several of the other races. And Jamie McLeod Skinner running away from the term progressive If anybody's a progressive, it's Jamie McLeod Skinner,
Right.
and she's a Bernie Sanders acolyte, right? She always has been.
No, I mean, she's endorsed by Elizabeth Warren. She's endorsed by the Progressive Caucus in Washington, D.C. She's funded by groups that actively support defunding the police, groups like Indivisible and a few others. And again, she beat Kurt Schrader, the moderate Democrat, running as a progressive. And then again, as soon as she wins the primary, she makes this, this miraculous transformation, into this moderate candidate.
A rural moderate, by the way.
Moderate candidate that's also from the San Francisco Bay Area, who was a politician outside of San Francisco not that long ago.
Oh,
all of a sudden, because she bought some boots and she owns a tractor, like I'm a moderate now. And the reality is, the media completely complicit in that transformation. It's like they have political amnesia and forgot how she won. She won running to the left to Kurt Schrader. But again, it's the problem with Oregon media. They drive me absolutely. I mean, I have to say, it has to be one of the worst states in terms of just honest, real journalism. There just isn't any out there.
Yeah, I know. Well, I spent 5 years as the communications director for the state party, and I dealt with them all the time. And there were just jaw-dropping moments when I dealt with them. One reporter actually took something that I said, completely changed it to something else, and just summarized what I said by saying something that bore no resemblance to what I said. And it was about the riots in Portland. And when someone feels like they are entitled to rephrase or to distort what's going on, and it's not journalism anymore, it is the marketing department for our opponents. And now there are some issues that I think have circumvented the media. I think inflation and the cost of living is definitely one of them. I think what we're seeing with crime and the way people feel about that, as well as homelessness, these top issues, you can't tell people feel better about that, or it's not a big deal. Care about abortion in a state where Roe versus Wade is coded into state law.
It's in the Constitution in Oregon, isn't it?
I don't know if it was it was definitely in statute, and they did it back in like 2017. So it was quite a while ago.
I might be mistaken there. I'm not sure.
But I think they also, the real debate, and this is the debate in the governor's race that's coming up, is they're attacking Christine Drazan on abortion. But she said, yeah, if you decide that you want to have state funds spent on paying for people to come from other states to get abortions here using government money, I'm going to veto that. You know what? That's where Oregonians are. They're not interested in paying for everybody else in the country. And we have some of the highest tax rates in the country here too. But these are not extreme points of view. By the way, one of our followers here following the show asked if Phil Knight donated more. He has donated $500,000 more to Christine Drazan, and that's after $1 million, I think, last month. So there are people who feel like the state has gone too far in the wrong direction, and they're willing to step up and take action to change it. That is reassuring. There's still some others that will probably come late to the game, but I think that the other story that's sort of the undercurrent, and I know that these stories don't always reach everybody in the country, so it's hard to follow every detail of like Oregon news, but it looks like Republicans have maybe the best chance in years to win some legislative seats. There's an article here that says Republicans face best chances in years to gain state Senate seats. There are 5 seats in the Portland and Salem area in Southern Oregon and the North Coast that are all highly competitive. Could win.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reality is, coattails are a real thing, right? And some of your listeners and viewers might remember in 2010, Chris Dudley ran for governor. He lost, but he lost a very close race. But him performing well at the top of the ticket, comparatively, allowed Republicans to pick up seats in the Senate and the House. The House ended up being split 30-30. So I can't remember how many seats they gained, but they gained seats to get to that status and have a dual speakership. Reality is that, with the way that Drazan is performing at the top of the ticket, which is very well, it is safe to assume that some folks are going to follow in her footsteps, and you're going to win some of these legislative seats. It's not outside the realm of possibility that you could see a chamber flip to Republicans, or you could see a 30-30 speakership or dual speakership in the House. Those are very, very real things. What it really comes down to, for those of you that are out there campaigning or volunteering and working on behalf of candidates, is really making sure that those voters that send in their ballots take the time to fill out all of those down ballot races.
Down ballot races, yep.
Down ballot drop off is a real thing. There's a lot of voters that will vote for governor and Congress and just not bother filling in the rest. It's those voters that you really have to focus on to make sure that you're really getting the best coattails possible.
Yeah, because a lot of the voters aren't going to have heard of the candidates' names down ballot, even if there's been some ads run. They're just not going to know who they are. But this is a change election, and it's pretty clear. I mean, that's been the core message that Christine Drazen's had, a message of change, new leadership. Then you got to do it across the board, because this whole thing that's been going on here in Oregon, it hasn't just been the governor. It hasn't just been Congress or the Senate. It's been all of these state legislative seats where people do stuff, and then the governor says, well, I think I'll just sign this. We all remember some of the worst items that they passed that are part of the reason why we're in this mess.
Right. And actually, and that reminded me something, kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation a little bit, that I want to mark as notable. I was having this conversation with someone else I'm working with earlier last week. My days are running together. Obviously, it's campaign season. But, crime being it's not a number one issue. The economy is the number one issue based on any polling, but crime is kind of popping up as this number 2, number 3 issue, depending on where you're campaigning in. That to me is extremely notable. The only other time in my career that I remember crime being a top 3 issue was when I'm originally from Louisiana. That's where I started working on campaigns. I started working on campaigns down there right after Hurricane Katrina in the New Orleans metro area, and we had a huge problem with crime. To put our crime into perspective, the homicide rate in New Orleans was higher per capita than Baghdad was at the same time.
Yeah.
So crime was a massive, massive problem. It was something that almost every candidate campaigned on, and since then, it hasn't been this big of an issue. So it's been interesting to me to see it percolate this way up to the top, because frankly, it's one of those issues that doesn't come around as a big campaign issue that often for most states.
This is true, and I think part of the two sides of the same coin is that what really bothers people about what's happened with homelessness is it's not been like just that there's people that are unfortunately unable to have housing. It's that there has been an enormous amount of crime that's surged with that, as well as the hard drug decriminalization that took place here in Oregon. That's been in every campaign, which has actually been it's put homelessness and the crime associated with it into hyperdrive. Right. So now maybe also another reason why it's emerged is because they seem to have classified homelessness as strictly we got to get some housing and it's all solved. But then they don't want the police to actually enforce any laws for the burglaries, the assaults, the car thefts, et cetera, et cetera. Not to mention the fact that you try to walk down a street and you can't, or it's dangerous. And this is something that has really, people have seen neighborhoods here go from idyllic to shooting at night.
It goes back to too. I mean, I think the problem with the homelessness issue in Portland or Oregon at large, because it's obviously a problem in Salem and some of the other metro areas as well. You see the same thing in California. Anywhere where homelessness is an issue, if you don't solve homelessness, then crime is soon to follow, right? Those two issues are correlated. That's not to say that every homeless person is a criminal or that every criminal is a homeless person. But the reality is that if you don't take care of it, And a lot of these folks that are on the streets have mental health issues or have drug addiction issues or have a combination of the two. If you don't put that in check and you don't figure out how to solve those problems, and again, Democrats have had ample time to solve them. They have had no roadblocks in terms of getting their policy agendas passed. Supermajority in the House, majority in the Senate, governor's office since 1982, 83, 84, whenever Vicatillo.
87, but yeah, the last time we won it was
Yeah.
82.
I mean, they have ran Oregon for decades, for lifetimes for some people. And they have not done anything to solve the homelessness problem. And that is played a significant role in the increase in crime. So, I think candidates like Christine Drazen, other candidates out there that are saying, look, like we got to, this is sort of a time for a change. I think voters are going to resonate with it because we've tried the Democrat way in Oregon for a very, very long time, and it hasn't gone anywhere.
Yeah, and I think some of their policies have also greatly contributed to this. And so, when it comes to cost of living, both at the national and state level, they've passed so many regulations. They've added so many taxes that are sort of buried in there, like for gasoline. And then I just read this headline from the other day. Cascade Natural Gas is the second largest natural gas supplier here in the state. The rate for natural gas is going to rise by 25.1% starting November 1st. 25.1%. And that is the state controlled and limited rise that the regulators had to approve. And we've been constantly told that it's bad to even use natural gas now. And yet there nearly everybody heats their homes with it. They do. Or they heat water or cook.
Well, yeah, and as much as people might hate on natural gas, reality is if you're not using that, or I mean, in terms of what you're really using, if you're not using natural gas, is coal, or you're using fossil fuels that are frankly much more dirty than natural gas is. Natural gas is the the cleanest fossil fuel there is in terms of emissions. But again, Democrats have tried to kind of push their sort of their clean energy agenda forward, sort of markets be damned, if you will. And I don't think there's anyone listening that wouldn't agree. Like, absolutely, we want to live in a clean environment. We want to be able to enjoy the outdoors. We don't want to have a larger carbon footprint than we need. But at the same time, like, we also can't live. We also like have to be able to heat our homes and drive to work. Like, and if we can't, then that's a problem.
Yeah, and they've it's a kind of mismanagement that I think people have come to understand, because if you've got an energy transition going on and you try to transition in 3 years instead of 30, there's huge downside to that. That's what we're experiencing in Oregon. Again, poster child for all this stuff. And they love to brag that they're doing this, but they just don't seem to be as affected. And maybe this is part of the demographic shift and the political shift that's gone on, where there's like a lot more working class people that seem to identify and want to support Republicans this time around, as well as people in some of the ethnic minorities that the Democrats felt they owned. And those folks are looking at this again and saying, I can't afford this stuff. You guys are blowing it. And then, of course, and the other issue, in addition to energy, is that there are a lot of people that are looking at how the schools have been handled, how much we're paying for something, and yet we're getting a terrible result in the state. Just awful.
Right. Well, and I think political power also atrophies, or calcifies is probably a better word. It calcifies. And what I mean by that is, Democrats have had control for so long that their biggest policy agenda, whether they admit it or not, is staying in power, not actually solving problems. And that I want to be fair in the sense that that's not a Democrat thing or a Republican thing. That is just how power and democracy works. If you have one party in power for too long, then reality is, I think that they get complacent on the policy side and they get more focused on what do we do to make sure we get reelected next year. And so that 20, 30, almost 40 years of that with Democrats, that's kind of gotten you where you are now.
Yeah, I think you actually pointed out is looking in recent election cycles how they had somebody to project their failures onto, or a scapegoat, or somebody to at least distract everybody with every election cycle, and now they've run out. Now
Right.
they're trying, but it's not working.
Right. And again, the best scapegoat that Tina Kotek can come up with is Kate Brown, the current Democrat governor. So that's the conundrum that they have. Is any problem in Oregon they have to own, and if they're not owning it, they're being dishonest. And I think voters see right through that.
That's the latest ad, by the way, from Christine Drazen. Is it's sort of like the closing argument here, which I know drives Tina Kotek nuts and drives some of the media that doesn't want anybody to think of this, but it's a mashup of Tina Kotek and Kate Brown, and it is not inaccurate. It is so accurate. It's like straight on target.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I can't think of a time in Tina Kotek's career where she really went toe to toe with Kate Brown until, her polling told her she had to.
Yeah. Yeah. Now there's just drawing back as we kind of reach the conclusion of our show here today. I thought it might be good to just take a little view. People here are paying attention to the rest of the country, even though we know there's a lot happening right here in Oregon that the rest of the country is watching.
Yeah.
What do you think this looks like across the rest of the country? I know it's not as radical a shift as we're seeing in Oregon, but and no one wants to take a red wave for granted or discourage people from bothering to vote, because they better. I mean, come on, right?
So I think there's little doubt in my mind that Republicans take back the House. For a variety of reasons. I think that's pretty clear. If some of your viewers are trying to think of like races to really look at, there's I think Iowa's 3rd congressional is a potential pickup. There's some races in New Mexico and Florida, and also some in New York that are really interesting. New York might be a good one to start with, just because that those polls will close, I think, like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon your time on election day. A couple in North Carolina that are entering the track. Frankly, the Senate, to me, the U.S. Senate, is where I think a lot of the heart palpitations and excitement for election night is going to come from. If I wanted to try to prognosticate a little bit and project what the night's going to look like, I really think it's going to all come down to Nevada. It would be my guess. I think Republicans are on a good path right now to be able to pick up Georgia. Herschel Walker's been pulling ahead in recent polls. Pennsylvania is going to be close. It still shows that Fetterman has a lead, but it looks like Dr. Oz has been gaining ground. Obviously, John Fetterman had a terrible debate performance last week that made national attention. But if Fetterman wins that race, as current polling suggests, and then Herschel Walker picks up Georgia, we've basically kind of all stayed the same. Because
hold everywhere else.
Yeah. So if Fetterman wins, then that means the Democrats pick up one, but then we win Georgia, which means we pick up one. Now it's kind of back to the same 50-50. If you start to move further out west, and by the way, I think J.D. Vance is going to win in Ohio. That seems pretty clear to me.
Yeah.
So it really
Rubio kind of a shoe in Florida, by the way. I think they pulled all stakes out of Florida.
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah. Florida is barely even a conversation at this point. I think it's going to be a rout. So it really comes down to Nevada, which is really close. It shows Laxalt ahead. But you're also seeing, candidates like Tiffany Smiley, who I don't think was given much of a chance, but I think was recently changed to toss-up. That could be a bit of a surprise and a bit of a shocker.
That'd be a shock.
But I think, two things. One, I mean, if Dr. Oz does pull off a win in Pennsylvania, then my confidence in the Republicans having a majority in the Senate goes up significantly. And then I think if we win in Nevada, then it's a done deal. So if you're asking me kind of what races am I looking at on election night to see what's going to happen nationally and who controls what in DC, Nevada is probably the first one that I'm paying the closest attention to, but obviously keeping an eye on Pennsylvania, Georgia, and then maybe Washington. But if we're winning Washington Senate, I think it's just going to be a bloodbath of a night for Democrats,
Oh
because
yeah.
that's going to correlate that type of win. That means that they're just getting absolutely slaughtered with a variety of demographics. I think that mean that we're picking up a lot of different stuff.
What about Arizona in that Senate race? I don't, it's hard to follow the polls kind of going around, but
Yeah, I didn't mean to skip that one over too much. I actually meant to bring that up. So, I mean, that's one where I think Blake Masters has made a significant comeback. I think he really started at a deficit. He's gaining ground. I think the question is, has he gained enough ground quick enough in order to win next week? Arizona is a state that has really robust kind of early vote. And they have election day voting, but they have a really robust early voting culture in their voters. So a lot of folks have already cast their ballots in Arizona. So that one's going to be tight. Obviously, the governor's race in Arizona, I think, is a little less tight. Kari Lake has a pretty significant lead. I doubt that changes. And also, maybe she has the coattails to kind of bring the U.S. Senate race along. It's hard to say. But yeah, I do think that, if I'm going to try to guess, which is a terrible thing for me to do on a show like this, that's going to be enshrined on the internet forever. I would say Herschel Walker wins Georgia. And, I'd put Pennsylvania and Arizona as too close to call. But I think to me, I feel cautiously optimistic for Republicans winning the Senate. Like, the path there is very real. It's just a matter of whether or not we can execute on it. The path to us winning the House is, super clear. I think there might be a universe out there where we don't pick up the House on election night, but I promise you we don't live in it.
Yeah, no, I think that there's so few seats. The margin, I mean, the only thing that would be holding back some of the gains is the fact that we actually won quite a few seats in 2020 that we weren't supposed to, right? That year. And then we did. And so, but we're 5 seats away, I think, in the House. And it feels like there's 5 seats, especially if we're talking about seats in Oregon that no one would have even considered. I mean, 2 of those 5 seats could be right here, which is, isn't that crazy? Who would have been betting money on 2 congressional races in Oregon being part of 5 seats you needed to win the House of Representatives?
It's going to be an interesting night to watch. And I should say, unfortunately, I know the show's coming to the end, but it looks like my laptop's coming to an end. I've got a warning. My battery life is at 8% because I had to move down here to closer to the Wi-Fi. So
we're good. I think. By the way, do you believe that Chuck Schumer, that we're in danger, hot mic moment, was that staged, or was that him actually just?
I don't give him too much. I don't give him enough credit to stage that. I think that was him having an honest moment. People think politicians are smarter than they actually are. Like, people, when something happens that's surprising, like, oh my God, these folks were genius. The reality is that we had no idea what we were doing. We just lucked out.
Yeah, and there's a lot of moving parts out there too. Yeah. So, well, thanks, Dave, for joining us. Really appreciate it. You give us kind of a great overview, but also a deep dive here on Oregon. And I know your heart's right here. Like, there's a lot happening in this state.
I'll actually be out there next week. I'll be out there for Election Day in Oregon.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to seeing you. And thanks again for coming on the show. And we look forward to maybe a post-election, what happened, let's break it down type of thing, and give folks something to take home after all the hard work and all the dust settles. Assuming that we aren't waiting for weeks and weeks and weeks for a race to get counted. Let's see. But
it's a date. You got me.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave. Thanks everyone for watching. Please share the show with everyone you can. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and I think we've just added Telegram. So we're going to keep growing, and we really appreciate all of you watching. Captive Audience, it's a place where you can kind of get an opinion like no place else in Oregon. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Captive Audience tomorrow night. Have a good one.